So with 28 years later now surpassing $100 million at the box office, and hopefully fingers crossed we finish this trilogy, I wanted to talk a little bit more about that film, and that's going to be this week, so stay tuned for 2 more videos I'm going to be doing on 28 years later, as well talking about The Town, as well as Dr. Ian Kelson, and of course we got to talk more about the Jimmies. Those videos will be coming out later by the end of the week. You should have those videos. But first, let's address the biggest thing that everybody talked about when the film first got announced, and that thing is, what the hell happened to 28 months later? Because of course we start with 28 days, we go to 28 weeks, and then we just jump to 28 years. So where was 28 months later in this whole ordeal? So I was reading an article from Polygon where it discusses a little bit more about this, and this is an article from Matt Patches, and apparently they talked to Alex Garland and Danny Boyle about this, and where exactly did this all go, right? So 28 weeks later came out almost right after 28 days, right? And now we were almost 20 or so years into the next film, and so of course Garland and Boyle decided to do just 28 years because they wanted to sort of set it in today's world, it seems. And there's a lot to talk about with pandemics and stuff like that and outbreaks as well. That's another video, but let's talk about what this Polygon article talks about. It says, when I asked Danny Boyle and 28 years later writer Alex Garland, who penned the original script as well, they can only laugh. Why didn't we get 28 months later? Boyle says, once we finish this trilogy, 28 months later will be the prequel. It's a trick George Lucas taught us. So of course that's talking about the way George Lucas made episode 4, 5, and 6 back in the 70s, 80s, and then went ahead in the early 2000s to do episode 1, 2, and 3, which of course in retrospect seems kind of interesting as well. But could that in fact be a joke or not? We don't know. They seemingly are joking in the article as it states, but apparently at some point months was absolutely on the table. So Garland apparently wrote a script that was teased in the press as 28 months later, and apparently that never came through as the timelines just didn't work out. Apparently this was also after Sunshine, in which Garland and Boyle worked together once again, and in a recent interview with Empire magazine, Boyle described it as a falling out. Apparently there was a big clash about how much needed to be explained to the audience. Boyle says, sci-fi, fucking Christ, you are really inventing the world in every single precious detail. I remember becoming obsessed with that. I wrote a prologue to try to explain it all, and Alex said, if you fucking put that in the film, I'm off. So apparently that was a thing that Danny Boyle and Alex Garland kind of butted heads about during 2007 Sunshine, which is a great film as well. One I think we should definitely talk about here. I want to go back to older films, y'all, and talk about them and just try to dissect them a little bit more. So maybe that's a possibility there. But apparently there were still ideas as well for sequels, and we've heard about it before. If Sunshine had been a better box office success, they would have gone and made a trilogy around it, and I think that was definitely a missed opportunity. Now it's being celebrated as such a great film. But the 28 franchise had always been on Boyle's mind, even when doing Sunshine, as he told MTV. There's an idea for the next one, something which would move the story on. I've got to think about it, whether it's right or not. I'm not particularly keen on franchises. I find it really depressing that they're so successful. It used to be when I started that a sequel would only make 60% of what the original film did. Now, of course, the sequels are much more successful than the originals. I'm more interested in doing originals. If you can come up with good enough ideas, people will come and see original films rather than the rehash, And I kind of get that right there, right? Because we do see it with 28 years that Danny Boyle and Alex Garland sort of try to steer as far away as possible from 28 Days, which is the film they worked on, and completely turn everything upside down and create a whole new world, which I think is great. But now they are doing a sort of, I would say, franchise with this trilogy. But I'm curious to see if the trilogy is going to feel the same, or if they're going to want each of these films to be able to sort of stand alone. We'll see. But the article continues to talk about how Boyle and Garland actually reconciled after Garland went ahead and did 2014's Ex Machina. Apparently a story that goes around saying is that they actually also discussed a sequel to 28 Days Later to Cillian Murphy, who says, every time I do bump into Danny or Alex, I always mention it. And that actually took me to an IGN article from 2015 in which it talks about a possible 28 months later happening after Garland released Ex Machina. He says, we've just started talking about it seriously. We've got an idea. Danny and Andrew and I have been having quite serious conversations about it, so it is a possibility. It's complicated. There's a whole bunch of reasons why it's complicated, which are boring, so I won't get into it, but there's a possibility. possibility. It's more likely to be 28 months than 28 years. 28 years gives you one more place to go. 28 decades is probably taking the piss, is what he says. And of course, I think what Garland was talking about there was the rights and everything that kind of shifted around after the whole Fox and Disney acquisition, and Sony ultimately also making a step into wanting to make the film and produce it and all of that. According to the Polygon article, Boyle and Garland also didn't share anything if any of those drafts that they had for 28 months bled into 28 years or made it or will make it into the upcoming sequels that are coming out. I'm curious to see if that's a thing. We do know that Alex Garland talks about the plot and also some of the themes around 28 years, really focusing on Brexit, which is something that happened in 2019, so way after he was talking about 28 months in that IGN article. So that's something I'm curious about as well. I feel like a lot of things maybe have changed around their lives as well. So something that I mentioned earlier is that Danny Boyle was very much so hesitant to make a franchise and wanted to do something original. So that's something he tells Polygon was a big thing when he was addressing 28 years later. He says the idea of the film in many ways was to be as original as possible. Its structure is very unusual. Its progression is even more unusual, and it's quite startling even at script stage to realize that the last third of the film is going to be this moving examination of mortality in different ways and commemorate and celebrate that, which is a thing that I'm going to be talking about in my upcoming video, so stay tuned for that. A strong human element is what I think we see in 28 years later, which I think was just beautiful to see, especially in a movie that I think so many people thought they knew what it was going to be, and it's always refreshing to see it's like, no, this is what Boyle and Garland wanted to be, not what you think it should be. So I think that's always a great thing right there. Garland goes on to say, one of the things we're doing in this is shortening the distance between the humans and the infected. We're acknowledging that they're not different from us. They have an illness which a doctor would look at in a different way to the way we would instinctively react to it. So it's as much to do with things that appear to be very different but have more in common and can be addressed or observed in different ways. And I'll talk more about that in another video because it's going to start diving into what I really want to address in a certain video. This was more about months and what exactly happened with it. So it seems that 28 months later was always on the table, probably up until like 2020 or so, because we do hear Garland talk about it during the whole press after Ex Machina. We do hear that there were talks about it happening, but I think the whole thing that happened, I think there were so many things that got in the way of it. Of course, like I said, there was the whole thing with Alex Garland sort of directing now, making his own things. He went on to work on other projects such as Civil War and also Debs before that. So I think Garland was really just trying to come as his own as a director, I feel. And I think 28 months later definitely was a project that probably could have happened, but I think that so many different variables getting in the way, and all of this, including with Alex Garland and Danny Boyle just doing their own things as well, because of course we got films such as Slumdog Millionaire, 127 Hours, Steve Jobs from Mr. Danny Boyle, amongst other things. And also Alex Garland, of course, went on to become more of a director in the time after 28 Days, which included films such as the film Ex Machina, Annihilation, Civil War, and so on and so forth. Even the TV show Debs, which I still think is such a great film. I really do think that a lot of this also had to do with the Fox and Disney merger acquisition, and the rights were probably all weird and all over the place, right? So of course time was going to be a thing that just got in the way of it. And do I think that we should have gotten 28 months later by now? I feel like it would have been kind of difficult to do that, especially with the actors and all of that, and so many people wanting to see Jim return, which I think is still an interesting topic, which I don't necessarily see why Jim should come back in a way, but I do see why people would want Jim back. Those are so iconic, and I think they have so much nostalgia, which can be a thing that can hinder movies. Some movies that have come out in recent memory that go heavy on the nostalgia and just forget about everything else. And you know, it's just a product of the time that we're in right now, I think, where people are craving that nostalgia. And I'm not knocking anybody who is, because I get the reason why, but I think it sort of slows down a progression and evolution of sorts that we should go forth with. But that's a whole other conversation. Nonetheless, 28 months was on the table. It was talked about for, it seems, a decade or so, until it wasn't anymore. And do we ever go back to it? I don't know if Danny Boyle and Alex Garland are joking or not. It seems like they're joking about doing a prequel trilogy just as George Lucas did, but if they did it, I'm curious to know, would you be watching or not, or or have you been totally put off from the 28 franchise after 28 years? I see so many people online say that they're done, they're not watching the Bone Temple or even the trilogy that's supposed to be heavily focused on Jim. You let me know in the comments down below if you're coming back this January to watch the Bone Temple, because I am. It currently sits as my favorite movie of the year so far. If you see my Letterboxd top 10, go follow me over there or check it out in the post and let me know what you think. But we'll talk more about Dr. Ian Kelson, Jamie, the Jimmies, as well as Linden's Fern Island in the upcoming videos this week, and we are anticipating a trailer in a couple of weeks myself. We'll see if it's true or not. But as always, let's get to 50,000 subscribers. We're on the road to that. We just did a video sort of starting our talk about the Black Phone 2 theories. That's just going to be a fire that keeps growing as we get closer to the release and also more trailers and teasers drop. So stay tuned for that conversation throughout the whole summer. But as always, that is going to do it for me on the road to 50,000 subscribers. Let's get to it. Stay safe, stay positive.